Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight, joined by Broncos TV's Matt Boyer. What up, Matt? How are you, man?
Guys, how are we doing? How are we feeling?
We're feeling pretty good under the circumstances. Yeah, I mean, this was a pretty wild weekend for the Broncos, and I certainly thought as we prepped the entire week, as the team prepped the entire week, that we'd see a little bit of a different setup out there, but the show must go on, as we always say. The Broncos, unfortunately, lose that game against the Saints, and they don't have much time to really sulk about it because they have the Chiefs coming up on the other side that have lost 10 straight. So, Matt, I think the big question I have on my mind right now is how does a team mentally reset after what was one of the wildest 48 hours I can remember in Broncos country?
I actually think it's going to be pretty easy, Ryan, because I mean, just personally, I went back and started to watch the tape of the Saints-Broncos game. I got 3 plays in, and I was like, what am I doing here? Like, why am I watching this? Vic Fangio even mentioned it, outside of the intricacies of, blocking up front, there really wasn't much to take away on the offensive side of the ball. So I think they're going to be able to flush this one pretty quick. But with the Chiefs, that's a mental hurdle that they just have not been able to figure out because – the last 5 years, this has been a recurring theme. How do you stop Patrick Mahomes? How do you stop this Chiefs team? So even though they're mathematically eliminated from winning the division, I think there's still a lot for them to learn and a lot for them to gain mentally if they can be competitive with the Chiefs this week. So it's all about building towards eventually being competitive with them on a year-to-year basis.
It's kind of an interesting point that Matt brings up there, Ben. Let's talk a little bit about how they can, move past this as fast as possible. Maybe because it wasn't like a real game. You didn't lose a defeat against the Saints where you had prepped all week and you put a good game plan together and then you just lost at home. This one was kind of a weird circumstance. Do you agree with Matt by you could maybe just move on from this pretty quick?
Oh, yeah. You don't even burn the tape on this one. You just throw it away. It's not even worth wasting a match on. I think that if you're the Denver Broncos, though, you might come into this Chiefs game maybe a little bit more loose than you previously had because you're laughing off a loss. You're not devastated that you lost a football game. You're laughing off the circumstance of what just happened and trying to put something together. Maybe you come into this game a little less tight than you have the last couple of years, and maybe you kind of ignore that losing streak, and maybe that kind of helps get the ball rolling about being more competitive, as Matt mentioned. I think that the Chiefs, the Broncos desperately need a competitive game against the Chiefs. And who knows, maybe not having a blizzard will be a competitive advantage this time too.
That's a really good point. Yeah, 10 straight. And then last year when they were at Arrowhead, it was the blizzard game. Matt, let's talk a little bit about what they're going to lean on in this game because I'd say consistency isn't a word that I usually describe the Broncos much this year. And especially on the offensive side of the ball where you're going to have to score some points. So what are you leaning on if you're the Broncos in this matchup?
Well, if you look back, Ryan, to the teams that have been competitive with the Chiefs, I mean, you look at, a game like the one that the Chiefs played against Carolina. Carolina really dominated time of possession, didn't turn the ball over too much. Remember the Broncos, those self-inflicted wounds in that first game with the Chiefs was really the story, that pick six and then the kickoff return for a touchdown. So don't give the ball away to the Chiefs. You can't give that offense any additional points. And I think that running the ball, controlling the clock, getting sustained drives is going to be key for the Broncos. I think they're going to have to aim to be in that, again, similar to the Chargers game where it was like 31-30, somewhere in that range in order to be competitive with this Chiefs offense, because 40 is not a high bar for this Chiefs offense week to week.
Yeah, and Ben, we were talking about the minutia of playing different positions. Maybe this is a little bit one of those games that, you do have to focus on the particulars because you can't have a bad penalty game. You can't have a bad turnover game. And the Chiefs are not perfect by any stretch. They've given up over the last 3 games around 29 points per game. So it's not like this is an impossible hill to climb for the team. But again, can the Broncos even get to 29 points if they're not doing the small things?
Well, that's exactly it. The margins are so thin right now for this Broncos team that you can't make mistakes. And that's what you have to do is you have to play mistake-free football, but you got to be loose enough that you're able to execute your offense. You're not playing tight. You got to be loose, but at the same time, learn to not make mistakes. And that's a tough balance to ride for anybody, let alone as young an offense as this Denver Broncos team is.
Yeah, and so I throw that out there, Matt, or averaging around 29 points per game given up over the last 3 games. You know what their high-powered offense has been, and we know that the defense at times it's a little bit of a false number because teams are kind of coming back. You saw it with Tampa Bay this last weekend. Tampa Bay just kind of came back later on. I think the Chiefs took their foot off the gas a little bit. So when you hear that number, what do you generally think? Do you think, okay, well, that's a great opportunity for the Broncos, or do you think, well, maybe that's a little bit of a soft number?
It's a little bit of a soft number, I think, but I honestly, the best games that the Broncos have played in my mind have been the most complete have been that Patriots game and then the game against the Dolphins. And I don't know if the Broncos are capable of winning a game against the Chiefs in that fashion. I do think they're going to have to ratchet up the scoring a little bit. But if the Broncos can be, again, in that 25-point to 30-point range or kind of keep the Chiefs in there, I think they have a real opportunity to be competitive with them, because we saw in this last matchup, if it weren't for those self-inflicted wounds, I think they would have been right in that range, would have kept Kansas City in that range, and I think they would have had a chance.
Ben, you mentioned playing loose. I think that we absolutely have to talk a little bit about Drew Lock, because Drew Lock in this matchup against his hometown team, I know he hates talking about these things. I know he wants to turn the page, and I'm a Bronco. But the fact is, until he beats that team, maybe even beats that team at Arrowhead, this is going to continually be a topic surrounding him, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and until he's consistently winning, it's going to be a topic too. It's one of those things where he's got to come out there and he's got to go back to what happened after that interception in the Miami game. We talked about it after the Miami game, where it felt like he was just coming into that. He'd been a couple of weeks where he'd been playing tight. He hits kind of rock bottom, going 0 for 6 with a pick, and then all of a sudden he just kind of got YOLO. He just kind of got back to being Drew Lock, and hopefully this time off will allow him to become that guy again, where he's allowed to just be Drew Lock. Go out there, have some fun, throw the football all over the yard, and score some points.
Yeah, and it certainly seemed like maybe he was a bit humbled by this situation when we saw his apology that he put out on social media. Matt, always good, man. Thank you so much for the time.
Thanks, guys.
I appreciate it. For Benjamin Allbright, I'm Ryan Edwards. Thank you for watching Broncos Country Tonight.